Welcome to Heartfelt Revenge Stories. You know what the worst thing someone can say to you at a family gathering is? That you were a mistake. Yeah, that's right. An accident. That's what my father told me in front of 31 relatives while he was standing in the yard my mother had spent decades maintaining with her own two hands. My name is Jessica, and I'm 28 years old. I work 12-hour shifts in the ICU watching people fight for their lives every single day. And on a 4th of July barbecue in the yard my mother loved more than she loved herself, my father decided it was the perfect time to tell me I was never supposed to exist. The house on Maple Lane was beautiful. A white colonial with green shutters and a wraparound porch that creaked in exactly 3 places. My mother knew every creak by heart. She'd step over the second and third boards every single morning when she went out to water her hydrangeas with her bare feet before my father woke up. She moved through that entire house like someone trying not to be heard. Like her own footsteps were something she needed to apologize for. I grew up thinking that was normal. That's the part that breaks my heart now. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I want to know if you're listening from New York or London or somewhere in between. Your support means everything to me, and I read every single comment. So please let me know where you are. My father, Robert, had this leather recliner in the living room. Dark brown, cracked at the armrests, positioned dead center facing the television. Nobody sat in it. Not my mother. Not me. Not even my Uncle Bill when he visited on holidays. It was understood without a word being said. That chair was his throne, and the rest of us arranged ourselves around it like planets orbiting the sun. He controlled the thermostat. 68 degrees in winter, 76 in summer. And if you touched it, if you even dared to adjust it without permission, God help you. He controlled the remote, the grocery list, the dinner schedule, everything. My mother cooked what he wanted when he wanted it and cleared the plates before he had to ask, before he even had to hint. She never had her own bank account. Her name wasn't on the checking account. Every Monday morning she'd ask him for grocery money, and he'd pull bills from his wallet one at a time, counting them out loud like she was a cashier making change. Like she was a stranger asking for spare coins. I didn't realize that wasn't how other families worked until I was about 14 and spent a weekend at my friend's house. I watched her mother swipe a credit card at Target without calling anyone first. Without asking permission. Without waiting for approval that would never come. I remember standing there thinking, that's allowed? You can just do that? Just take your own money and spend it? The concept felt like science fiction. The house itself was beautiful though. Stunning, really. My mother made it that way. The window boxes overflowing with flowers. The herb garden along the south wall that smelled like rosemary and thyme and possibility. The porch swing she'd found at an estate sale and restored with her own hands, painting it white and hanging it from chains she'd polished until they gleamed. She poured everything she couldn't say out loud into that house. Everything she swallowed down. Every word she didn't speak became a garden bed. Every argument she didn't have became a curtain she hung with care. And my father called it his. My roof. My rules. He'd say that whenever either of us had an opinion. Whenever we suggested something different or wanted something our own way. You don't like it? There's the door. Like we were guests in a hotel instead of his wife and daughter living in the only home we'd ever known. My father was not a complicated man. He believed 3 things with absolute certainty. That he was the head of the household. That women had supporting roles. That anyone who challenged either of those points was disrespectful and needed to be corrected. What do women know? That was his refrain. He said it at dinner when my mother suggested they refinance the mortgage. He said it at Thanksgiving when his cousin Linda brought up politics. He said it to me when I told him I'd been accepted into the nursing program at the state university. Nursing? So you'll be emptying bedpans? Great career for a girl, I guess. That's what he said. Like the fact that I was going to spend my life saving people, keeping them alive through the worst moments of their existence, was somehow beneath him. Somehow less than. My mother never argued with him. Not once in 30 years that I witnessed. When he raised his voice, she'd go still. Her shoulders would pull in. Her hands would fold in her lap. Her eyes would go to the tablecloth like it held the answer to a question she was afraid to ask out loud. I used to think she was being patient. That's what I told myself. That she was just a patient woman waiting out his moods. I understand now that she was being safe. There was one night I can't shake. I was 16 years old. My father came home from work in a mood because something had gone wrong at the auto parts store where he worked. A parts order had gotten mixed up, and he decided that was the perfect reason to start in on me. My grades. My friends. The length of my shorts, which were apparently sending the wrong message. His voice filled the entire kitchen like a pressure system moving in, like a storm that had decided the whole house was its territory. I was standing at the counter with my hands gripping the edge so hard my knuckles went white, refusing to cry because I'd learned that tears just made it worse. And I saw my mother. She was sitting at the table behind him, and for just a second, half a second, her shoulders dropped. Her breath came out. Relief. Real unmistakable relief. Because it was me that night, not her. His anger was pointed at me, and that meant she got to breathe. That meant she got to disappear into the safety of being ignored. Then her eyes met mine, and the relief turned into something I didn't have a word for until I was much older. Guilt. Deep, corrosive, soul-eating guilt. Because in that moment, I understood something about my mother that I wouldn't fully comprehend until she was gone. She wasn't weak. She was surviving. And sometimes surviving means watching your own child take the hits so you can catch your breath. That night, after he'd fallen asleep in his recliner with the television still on, my mother came to my room. She sat on the edge of my bed in the darkness and whispered something I've never forgotten. "I'm sorry I can't protect you the way I should," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, like the walls had ears, like the darkness itself might report her to him. I told her it was fine. It wasn't fine. It was never fine. But that's what you say when you love someone who can't protect themselves, let alone protect you. So here's the question I need you to think about as we go forward. What happens when you finally understand why someone you love made the choices they made? What happens when you realize they weren't choosing weakness? They were choosing survival? And what do you do with that knowledge when it's too late to change anything? The call came on a Tuesday in March. I was sitting in my Honda Civic in the hospital parking lot, the engine off, a cold coffee in the cup holder getting cold enough to develop that film on top that tastes like regret. I just finished a 12-hour clinical rotation. My feet were screaming. My back was screaming. Every muscle in my body was reminding me that I'd chosen a profession that required me to be on my feet, while other people's bodies fell apart around me. My mother's name lit up my phone. I remember the exact time because I looked at the dash. 3:47 in the afternoon. That time of day when light starts to shift and you can feel the evening coming even if you can't see it yet. Pancreatic cancer. That's what she said. Stage 3. She said it the way she said everything difficult. Quietly. Like she was apologizing for the inconvenience of being sick. Like her diagnosis was somehow an inconvenience to him. To all of us. Like she'd gone out of her way to get a terminal illness just to create extra work in the household. The doctor says we should talk about treatment options, she continued. I didn't want to bother you during your shift, but I thought you should know. I didn't bother you. My mother said that while she was sitting in a doctor's office being told she was dying, she was worried about bothering me. That's the kind of woman she was. I drove straight home. 2 hours on the interstate with both my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, because if I loosened my grip even a little bit, I was going to scream. 2 hours of listening to the road and the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing, which is honestly the loneliest sound in the world. When I got home, where was my father? In the garage. The door was half open. A Budweiser was sitting on the workbench. He was polishing the chrome on his Dodge Ram truck, which he polished every single Saturday like that truck owed him something personal. Like the truck had wronged him in some fundamental way, and could only be forgiven through relentless chrome maintenance. He never missed a Saturday. Not once. But in the 14 months of my mother's chemo and radiation, the months when she was vomiting from the poison they were pumping into her veins, when her hair fell out in clumps that she collected in her hands like she was trying to keep pieces of herself together, when she couldn't eat anything but ice chips and ginger ale, my father did not drive her to the hospital once. Not one single time. I did. Every Tuesday and every other Thursday I picked her up in my Civic, helped her into the passenger seat, held a plastic bag in my lap in case the nausea hit before we got there. I'd sit in the waiting room reading pharmacology notes while they dripped poison into her veins, poison that was supposed to save her. And then I'd drive her home and help her to bed and leave a glass of ginger ale on the nightstand. My father's contribution was to complain that dinner was late. During those months, something shifted between my mother and Aunt Carol. Phone calls got longer. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen and my mother would lower her voice really quickly and say, "I'll call you back, Carol," then smile at me like nothing was happening. Like her sister wasn't calling about something important. Something that needed to be kept quiet. I figured they were just being sisters. That's what I told myself. I had no idea they were building something. Constructing a fortress out of legal documents and notary stamps and the kind of planning that happens when you know you're running out of time. My mother died on a Sunday in October. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful, and I believed her because I was holding my mother's hand when it happened. I felt the exact moment she stopped gripping back. I felt her fingers go slack. I felt the moment when the person I loved more than anything else in the world just stopped fighting. My father was downstairs watching football. I can't make this up. The woman he'd been married to for 30 years was taking her last breath. And he was downstairs yelling at a television screen about a quarterback who'd thrown an interception. I handled everything. The funeral. The phone calls. The flowers that people sent. The obituary in the county paper. I coordinated the reception. I accepted the casseroles from people at church who meant well, but didn't understand that grief doesn't taste good regardless of how well it's seasoned. Robert sat in his recliner and told people he was too broken up to function, and they believed him. They absolutely believed him because he'd perfected the role of grieving husband the way some men perfect a golf swing. With practice and no actual feeling underneath. Here's something nobody tells you about loss. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves. Some days you forget they're gone for just a split second, and then the reality crashes back in. Some days you smell something that reminds you of them and you have to sit down. Some days you're angry at them for leaving. And some days you're angry at everyone else for not missing them the way you do. 5 months after the funeral, my father introduced Donna. She showed up at a Sunday dinner wearing a white cashmere sweater and heels that clicked on my mother's hardwood floors like a countdown to something ending. She sat in my mother's chair at the table, the one nearest the kitchen, the one my mother had sat in for 30 years, positioning herself so she could jump up immediately if anyone needed anything, if anyone needed her. And my father didn't even blink. He just smiled at her like she'd always been there. Like she belonged in that chair more than my mother ever did. He carved the roast like it was a celebration. Like this was a victory worth marking with good cuts of meat and red wine that actually cost more than $5. After dinner, my father slid a manila folder across the table to me. "Just some administrative paperwork for your mom's estate," he said. "Lawyer stuff. Sign where the tabs are and we'll be done with it." I was exhausted. I was grieving. I was 25 years old, and I just spent 14 months watching my mother disappear. Watching her become someone else. Someone smaller. Someone who hurt in ways that morphine couldn't touch. I signed most of the pages without reading them. There were about 8 or 9 forms. I got through 6 or 7 and then my pager went off. Night shift. ICU. A patient coding. I left the last pages unsigned and told him I'd finish next week. I didn't know it then, but one of those unsigned pages was a quitclaim deed. That single piece of paper was supposed to sign away my mother's house. The house she'd bought with her own inheritance. The house she'd loved more than she'd loved herself. That document was sitting there on the table like a spider waiting for the right moment to strike. The expired power of attorney form I'd signed by accident was already void. Robert just didn't realize it. He didn't understand how legal documents worked. He didn't understand that you can't just forge someone's signature and expect it to hold up in court. He'd gotten lucky with me. I hadn't read what I was signing, but his luck was about to run out. My father didn't waste any time. Within weeks of that dinner with Donna, the phone calls started. But not to me. To everyone else. To everyone who mattered. To everyone who could influence the story being told about me. Uncle Bill got the first call. Then Cousin Patty. Then the neighbors on Maple Lane. Then the women at my mother's old church group where she'd spent every Wednesday afternoon for years, organizing flower arrangements for the sanctuary and listening to other people's problems because listening was the one thing she'd been taught to do well. My father's version of the story went like this. His daughter, whom he'd raised and sacrificed everything for, Had abandoned him in his grief. Wouldn't call. Wouldn't visit. Wouldn't even come to dinner. Ungrateful. Selfish. Cold. The truth was, I was working 4 night shifts a week. I was spending my days off sleeping or crying in my apartment or staring at the ceiling trying to understand why my mother had left me alone in a world with him. But truth doesn't travel as fast as a victim story told by a man with a deep voice and good timing. Truth gets lost somewhere between the first telling and the 5th retelling. By the time it gets to you, it's been filtered through so many mouths that it doesn't even resemble what actually happened. Uncle Bill texted me on a Wednesday night at 11 p.m., right after I'd lost a patient. My hands still smelled like nitrile gloves. The smell of latex and desperation, and the particular way your hands smell after you've been doing chest compressions on someone whose heart won't start again. Your dad is alone, the text read. He lost his wife. Don't be selfish. Then 2 minutes later, a follow-up. A link to an article titled, When Adult Children Abandon Aging Parents, A Growing Crisis. I stared at my phone in the break room and felt something I hadn't felt since I was 16. That old familiar shrinking. Like I was the problem. Like I was the one who needed to be fixed. Like the fact that my father had never once visited me, never asked about my life, never wanted to know anything about the person I was becoming. That somehow didn't matter because I was the woman and I was supposed to be the caregiver and I was supposed to make him feel better about himself. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. What do you say to an uncle who's known you your whole life but has never once asked for your side of the story? What do you say to someone who's already made up their mind? I called Uncle Bill the next morning. I tried to explain the shifts, the exhaustion, the fact that my father had never once visited me, that he'd never asked how I was doing, that he'd spent most of my childhood making me feel like I was a problem that needed to be solved rather than a person who deserved love. Bill listened for about 45 seconds. Then he said, "He's your father, Jessica. You only get one." After that, I stopped trying to explain. There's a difference between people who don't understand and people who don't want to. There's a difference between people who are genuinely confused and people who've decided what they believe and are just waiting for you to confirm it. I didn't know yet that my father was building towards something specific, that the Whisper campaign wasn't just grief. It was strategy. It was a plan. It was the opening move in a chess game where I was the piece he was trying to sacrifice. I went back to the house on Maple Lane in April. I needed to pick up a box of my mother's things I'd left in the upstairs closet. Old photo albums mostly. Her jewelry box. A scarf that still smelled like her Chanel No. 5 perfume. The one smell that could still make me feel like she was standing right next to me. The front door was unlocked. I let myself in and stopped 3 steps past the threshold. The living room looked the same. His recliner was still there. The TV was still on mute. Beer cans on the side table. But something was different in the air. A different perfume. Something synthetic. Something like vanilla and regret. I went upstairs. My parents' bedroom door was open. The wedding photo that had hung above the dresser for as long as I could remember was gone. The photo of my mother in a simple ivory dress laughing. Her hand on my father's chest like she was reaching for something she wasn't sure he had. That photo was gone. Just the nail was left. A small hole in the wall. Evidence that something had been there and was no longer. In its place, Donna had hung a framed print of a beach sunset. Like she could erase my mother from this room just by hanging something prettier on the wall. Like memories could be covered up the same way you cover up water stains in a rental apartment. My mother's vanity was covered in Donna's things. The oak one with the oval mirror. The one she'd sat at every morning to put on her lipstick, even when she was too sick to leave the house, even when she was bald and gaunt and barely recognizable as herself. Even then she'd put on her lipstick. She'd looked in that mirror and tried to find the woman she used to be. Now it was covered in Donna's compacts and brushes. A bottle of Victoria's Secret body mist where my mother's Chanel No. 5 used to sit. Donna appeared from the master bathroom in a terry cloth robe, toweling her hair. She looked at me without surprise. "Oh, your dad said you wouldn't mind," she said. Like my mother's bedroom was a room that could be claimed by anyone who was currently sleeping in it. I heard my father's voice from the bottom of the stairs. "Quit snooping, Jessica. This isn't your room anymore." I almost left. Almost just took my box and drove away without saying a word. But I passed through the living room on my way out, And there on the coffee table, tucked under a TV guide, was a folder. A real estate folder with Donna's agency logo on it. Inside was a comparable market analysis for the house on Maple Lane. Estimated value, $280,000. He wasn't just moving on from my mother. He was planning to sell her house. That was the first time I thought, he's not just cruel. He's planning something. He's building towards something. And I'm going to need to be ready for it. Because here's what people don't tell you about family betrayal. It's not a single moment. It's not one big explosion. It's a series of small choices. It's noticing the wedding photo is gone. It's seeing her things replaced. It's watching someone erase the person you loved from every room they shared. And it's understanding very slowly and very painfully that this isn't about grief. This is about power. This is about someone deciding that because she's gone, he gets to rewrite the entire story of who she was and what she meant. 2 weeks later, my father called me. The first time in months he dialed my number instead of calling Uncle Bill to tell him what a terrible daughter I was. Come to dinner Friday, he said. Donna's making pot roast. The invitation alone should have been a red flag. My father had never once asked me to dinner. He announced it or he expected it, but he didn't ask. He didn't say, "Would you like to come?" He said, "You're coming to dinner Friday." It was a statement, not a question. A demand dressed up in politeness. I went anyway. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to see what he was planning. Maybe because I wanted to understand his endgame. Maybe because there's some part of me that still wanted to believe my father could surprise me with kindness, even though every piece of evidence suggested otherwise. The table was set for 3. Donna had put out cloth napkins and a candle. Staging, I realized later, like she was showing a house. Like this dinner was a showing, and we were the inventory she needed to move. The pot roast was fine. The wine was cheap. My father was on his best behavior, which meant he only interrupted me twice while I tried to talk about work. He almost made it through the whole meal without being himself. Almost. After the plates were cleared, he reached behind his chair and produced another manila folder. Same kind as before. He placed it between us on the table, square to the edge, like it was nothing. Like he was handing me the bill for dessert. The lawyer said we missed one form from last time, he said. Just transfers the property title into my name for estate management. Standard stuff. I opened the folder. 1 page. The heading read Quitclaim Deed. Below it in plain language that couldn't be misunderstood. Transfer of all right, title, and interest in the real property at 414 Maple Lane from the estate of Ellen Whitmore to Robert A. Harper. I read it twice. The words didn't change. They meant exactly what they said. My father wanted me to sign away my mother's house. Donna appeared at my elbow with a pen. It's really standard, she said. I see these all the time in real estate. I looked at my father. He was watching me with that expression I'd seen 1,000 times. The one that meant, do what I say and don't ask questions. The one that said, I've already won this, I just need you to accept it. I need to have my own lawyer look at this, I said. His jaw tightened. Lawyer? You don't trust your own father? If it's just paperwork, I said, then there's no rush. I'll have someone look at it. I took the quitclaim deed, put it in my bag, and drove straight to Aunt Carol's house. I didn't call ahead. I just drove. 2 hours on back roads because I couldn't handle the interstate right then. I couldn't handle thinking about anything except the fact that my father was trying to steal my mother's house. Carol Whitmore lived in a brick ranch house 12 miles outside of town. The kind of place that smelled like coffee and spreadsheets and tax returns. She'd been a CPA for 25 years. Her kitchen table had seen more W2S than family dinners, but it had also seen something else. It had seen my mother and Carol 2 years before my mother died, signing documents that would change everything. Carol opened the door before I knocked. Like she'd been expecting me. Like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. I put the quitclaim deed on her oak kitchen table. The same table where my mother had sat with Carol, making plans for a daughter she wouldn't live to see receive them. Carol picked up the form. Read it once. Her face went still. Not surprised. Something worse. Confirmed. He's trying to take the house, she said. Her voice was calm the way it always was. Carol didn't do drama. She did facts. The house was never his, Jessica. Your mother bought it with inheritance money from your grandparents. $180,000. The deed is in her name. Ellen Whitmore. Your father's name is not on it. It was never on it. I stared at her. 30 years my father had called that house his. 30 years of my roof and my rules and acting like he owned the ground we walked on. And the entire time he didn't own anything. Carol continued. Your mother made a will. A real one. With the lawyer Richard Avery downtown. The house goes to you. It's already been through probate. It's been yours since your mother died. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened and closed like I was a fish trying to breathe air. Carol gave me a moment. Then she stood and walked to the filing cabinet in her home office. She came back with a sealed envelope. Cream-colored. My mother's handwriting on the front in her careful cursive. For Jessica. When she's ready. Your mother left this too, Carol said. She told me to give it to you when you needed it. I think you need it. I held the envelope with both hands. My hands were shaking. This was my mother. This was her voice frozen in time, waiting for the moment when I'd need to hear it. Read it when you're ready, Carol said. But don't read it alone. I didn't open it that night. I sat in my car in Carol's driveway for 20 minutes with the engine off, holding the letter my mother had written for me from the other side of death. And I thought about every time my father had said, "My house, my rules." I thought about how my mother must have sat there listening, knowing the truth, saying nothing because saying something would have meant fighting, and fighting would have meant losing, and losing would have meant her daughter growing up without a mother. So she chose silence. She chose to let him believe his lie. And then she chose to spend her last good months making sure I'd have the truth when I needed it. Because here's what I understand now. My mother didn't stay quiet because she was weak. She stayed quiet because she was planning. She was building something. She was creating a future where I would stand on solid ground while my father had nothing to stand on at all. The next morning, I called the law office of Richard Avery. His receptionist put me through in under a minute, which told me everything I needed to know. He'd been briefed. He'd been waiting. "Miss Harper," he said when he picked up. "I've been expecting your call honestly for about a year now." He confirmed everything Carol had told me. The will was valid. It had been filed. It had been entered into probate. The house at 414 Maple Lane, deed recorded under Ellen Whitmore, had transferred to me upon my mother's death as the sole named beneficiary. The paperwork was clean. The title was clear. "Your father has no legal claim to the property," he said. "He can reside there as a guest, but he cannot sell it, cannot mortgage it, and cannot transfer title without your signature on a quitclaim deed, which I assume is why you're calling." I told him about the form my father had handed me. The manila folder. The pressure. Donna standing next to me with a pen in her hand. Avery paused. "Then I should tell you something else. About 18 months ago, before your mother passed, a loan officer at First Regional contacted me because someone had applied for a second mortgage on 414 Maple Lane. The applicant was Robert Harper. The bank flagged it because his name wasn't on the deed. They denied the application. My stomach dropped. Your mother found out, Avery said. That's when she called Carol. That's when we finalized the will and set up the trust. The trust? I hadn't even gotten to that part yet. $220,000, Avery said. Held in a revocable trust naming you as beneficiary. Funded from your mother's separate inheritance. Your father has no access and no knowledge of its current balance. I sat in my apartment with the phone pressed to my ear, doing the math my mother had done when she was lying in a hospital bed, dying. She'd left me the house. She'd left me money. She'd left me the legal documents to prove that my father had tried to steal from her, tried to mortgage property that wasn't his, tried to commit fraud while she was sick. And I had no idea any of it was coming. 4th of July on Maple Lane looked like a postcard. The kind of day where you could pretend everything was beautiful and perfect and fine. My father had gone all out. Or rather, his credit card had. A brand new Weber Genesis grill sat on the patio like a chrome altar to his own ego, still wearing its price tag tan line where the sticker had been peeled off that morning. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the porch rails. A folding table ran the length of the backyard, covered in a checkered cloth, weighed down with coleslaw and corn and coolers of Bud Light. I counted 31 people when I arrived. 31. Uncle Bill and his wife near the potato salad. Cousin Patty with her 3 kids chasing sparklers across the grass. My father's coworkers from the auto parts store. Neighbors. Church people. The full arsenal of social pressure assembled on lawn chairs and picnic blankets under a cloudless sky. And Donna standing at the head of the table in a white sundress and new sandals, holding a glass of Prosecco, laughing at something Uncle Bill said, playing the hostess in my mother's yard beside my mother's hydrangeas, under the string lights my mother had hung 3 summers ago when my father was in his recliner yelling at the television. I came straight from a 12-hour shift. I was still wearing my scrubs. Seal blue. Wrinkled at the knees. My badge clipped to my chest. I hadn't changed on purpose. Those scrubs were the only honest thing I could put on that day. Every person there knew what I did for a living. Every person there knew I'd been the one at my mother's bedside when she died. Aunt Carol was already seated near the back, a paper plate balanced on her knee, sunglasses on. When I walked through the side gate, her eyes found mine immediately. She gave me one small nod. I had the envelope in my scrub pocket. Beside it, a folded copy of the will, notarized. A printout of the recorded deed. My father saw me arrive. He saw my empty hands. No manila folder. No signed form. His smile stayed in place, but something behind his eyes went flat. There she is, he announced to the yard. I told her to come. She finally listens. By 5 o'clock, my father was 6 beers in. I counted every single one because I'm trained to track inputs, to monitor patients, to note the exact moment when someone crosses a threshold. My father crossed his around beer number 4. His voice shifted from conversational to performance. He positioned himself near the grill, at the center of gravity, where people naturally came to him. He flipped burgers with one hand and gestured with the Budweiser in the other, telling stories louder than they needed to be told. Old stories. Stories about his glory days. About the truck he'd restored. About the time he'd told off a county inspector. Man stories. The kind that started with I and ended with everyone else being wrong. Around beer 5 he started in on family. You know, he said, loud enough for the nearest cluster of lawn chairs to hear. I always thought I'd have a boy. Somebody to take over. Teach him the business. Pass something down. He shook his head, smiling like he was telling a joke that only he understood. Didn't work out that way. A few people chuckled politely. Donna refilled his cooler from behind, sliding another can into his hand like she was loading a weapon. I was sitting at the far end of the table on one of those low aluminum folding chairs. The kind they keep stacked in garages for overflow guests. Put me about 6 inches below everyone else. I ate my potato salad slowly and I didn't respond. I knew what was coming. I could feel it building the way you can feel a storm moving in. The pressure change. The shift in the air. My father looked over at me. I saw it happen. The moment when a drunk man talks himself into something. He straightened up. He cleared his throat. He took a long pull of beer number 6. And then he said it. You know you were an accident, right? He said it standing. He said it facing me. He said it at a volume that cut through every side conversation, every child's laugh, every pop of a distant firecracker in the neighborhood. I wanted a son. The yard went silent the way a room goes silent when glass breaks. Not gradually. All at once. Like someone had pulled the plug on the noise. 31 people. Every single one of them looking at me. Aunt Carol's paper plate hit the ground. Potato salad. Coleslaw. A deviled egg. All of it in the grass. She didn't pick it up. She just stood there, her hand still in the shape of holding something. My father wasn't done. But your mother insisted on keeping you, he continued. He tilted his beer toward me like a pointer. And look how you turned out. A nurse who can't even afford her own apartment. Someone's child asked for a sparkler. Nobody answered. Then Donna stepped forward from behind my father, and I saw what she was carrying. The manila folder. The quitclaim deed. And a pen. A silver ballpoint. Expensive looking. The kind agents give clients at closings. Honey, Donna said. Her voice dropping into that soothing register real estate agents use when they want you to ignore the foundation cracks. Your dad just needs you to sign this so he can take care of the house. It's what your mom would have wanted. She placed the folder and the pen on the table in front of me, right next to my paper plate like it was dessert. My father turned to the crowd. This is a family matter, he said. My daughter's been difficult about some basic estate paperwork. I just need a signature. That's it. Uncle Bill from his chair. Just sign it, kid. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. A woman I barely recognized murmured. Poor Robert. He just wants to keep the house. 31 pairs of eyes. Some sympathetic. Some uncomfortable. Some looking at their shoes. I looked at the pen. I looked at the paper. I looked at my father standing in the yard my mother had planted, wearing the confidence of a man who had never once been told no by the women in his life. And I felt the envelope in my scrub pocket pressing against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Picked up the pen. I need you to understand this. Picked it up. I held it between my fingers and I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go. And for one terrible second I understood my mother completely. Because this is what it feels like. This is what she lived with every single day. The weight of 31 stairs. The math your body does before your brain catches up. If I just sign, this stops. If I just agree, the silence goes away. If I just give him what he wants, I can leave and breathe and never think about this table again. I understood in that moment how my mother had spent 30 years saying yes to a man who never deserved it. Not because she was weak. Because the cost of no was a room full of people deciding you were the problem. My father watched me hold that pen and I saw it. A flicker of victory in his eyes. He thought he had me. He thought the pressure and the crowd and the beer-soaked cruelty had done what it always did. Don't embarrass me in front of the whole family, he said, quieter now, leaning in. Almost gentle. The way he'd say it to my mother when she hesitated. A cousin shifted in his lawn chair. Someone's toddler whined. The charcoal in the grill popped. I held that pen for 5 full seconds, and then I put it down. I set it on the table parallel to the quitclaim deed. Precisely and deliberately. The way I set instruments on a surgical tray. No one word. No volume behind it. No tremor. Just the flattest, cleanest syllable I'd ever spoken. No. My father blinked. Excuse me. I'm not signing this. Not today. Not ever. The yard stayed silent, but the quality of the silence changed. From shock to anticipation. From disbelief to something else. Understanding. My father's face went the color of the charcoal in his grill. Not embarrassed red. Fury red. The kind I knew from childhood. The kind that used to make my mother disappear into the kitchen and close the door softly behind her. You ungrateful, he started, then caught himself. He recalibrated. He looked at the crowd, then back at me. You're just like your mother. Useless and stubborn. He said it louder than he needed to, because my father always needed witnesses when he was right. Your mother didn't leave anything behind worth talking about. A vanity table and some dead flowers. That's her legacy. And you? He jabbed a finger in my direction. You're standing here making a scene because you can't bring yourself to do one simple thing for the man who raised you. Donna touched his arm. Robert, maybe we should quiet. He shook her off without looking at her. Donna's hand dropped. She took a half step back like she was starting to understand what she'd gotten herself into. Uncle Bill sat motionless in his Adirondack chair. Cousin Patty pulled her youngest onto her lap. My father wasn't done. He never was. He built a lifetime on having the last word. And he must have felt it slipping because what he said next was the thing he should never have said. He looked right at me and his voice dropped to that register. The one that pretended to be calm but was really just cruelty in a lower key. Your mother was too weak to do anything right, including raising you. The yard went so quiet that I could hear the flag snapping on a pole 2 houses down. That was the line. Not what he'd said about me. I could carry that. I'd been carrying it for 28 years. But he said it about her. The woman who spent her last months alive making sure I'd be standing exactly here. Exactly now, with exactly what I needed. He said it about my mother. And something in me locked into place. I stood up. Not fast. Not angry. I stood up the way I stand up at a patient's bedside when their vitals are crashing. Steady. Controlled. Already 3 steps ahead. I pushed the quitclaim deed across the table toward my father. The paper slid over the checkered cloth and stopped against a bowl of baked beans. I'm not signing this, I said. Not today. Not ever. My father's mouth opened. For a man who always had something to say, he suddenly looked like he was buffering. And I'd be careful about what you say next about my mother. His eyes narrowed. Or what? I reached into the chest pocket of my scrubs, the one over my heart, where I usually kept a pen light. And I pulled out a cream-colored envelope, handwritten, sealed until 2 nights ago when I finally opened it at Carol's kitchen table with a cup of tea and a box of tissues. I held it up so the whole yard could see it. Funny, I said. Mom told me something different before she died. My father's eyes locked on the envelope. I could see him trying to calculate. What was it? What did she write? What could she possibly have said? Want me to read her letter? The yard held its breath. My father's right hand, the one holding the Budweiser, started to tremble. Not a lot. Just enough. The aluminum can made a tiny crinkling sound in the silence. He knew. He didn't know what was in it, but he knew his wife. And he knew that a woman who'd been silent for 30 years doesn't write a letter unless she has something to say. I didn't wait for permission. I slid my finger under the flap. It had already been opened and resealed with a piece of tape from the night I'd first read it at Carol's, and I unfolded the pages. 3 sheets of cream stationery, front and back. In my mother's careful cursive. My father took a step toward me. Give me that. Whatever your mother wrote, she wasn't in her right mind. She was medicated. She wrote this 2 years before the diagnosis, my father, I said, my voice steady. That was Aunt Carol, speaking from the back of the yard. Her voice carried like it had been waiting for this exact moment. I was there when she wrote it. I watched her sign it. Because this is the moment everything changed. This is the moment my mother's voice, preserved in ink and paper and 30 years of planning, stepped into that yard and took up space. This is the moment my father realized he was no longer the person telling the story. She was. And I was the one brave enough to read it out loud. Uncle Bill turned in his chair. Carol, what's going on? Carol didn't answer him. She was looking at my father. My father stopped walking. He looked from Carol to me, then to the letter, then back to Carol. His tongue moved across his lower lip. A nervous habit I'd noticed 1,000 times. Always just before he lied. This is ridiculous, he said. Ellen didn't. You had your speech, Dad. I kept my voice flat. I see you flat. The voice I use when a family member is screaming. And I need them to hear me without raising my volume. Now it's Mom's turn. I looked down at the first page. A breeze came through the yard, warm, smelling like charcoal and cut grass and someone's sparklers, and it fluttered the edges of the stationery in my hands. 31 people leaned forward without realizing it. I began to read. My sweet Jessica, I read aloud, and my voice only broke on the second word. I swallowed it down the way I've learned to swallow things down in rooms full of people who need me steady. If you're reading this, I'm not there anymore. And I'm sorry. Not for dying. For all the years I was alive and didn't say what I should have said. The yard was so still I could hear the ice shifting in the coolers. Your father told you, I continued reading. Told everyone that you were an accident. That he wanted a son. He said it so many times that I think he believes it now. But I need you to know the truth. Because the truth is the only thing I have left to give you. My father said, Jessica, that's enough. I didn't look up. I wanted you, Jessica. I wanted you more than I have ever wanted anything. I spent 2 years in a fertility clinic. 2 years of progesterone injections every week. Blood draws every month. Appointments I drove to alone because your father said it was a waste of money. A ripple went through the crowd. Cousin Patty put her hand over her mouth. Uncle Bill sat forward in his chair. He didn't want a child, I continued. Not a son. Not a daughter. He said we couldn't afford it. He said he wasn't ready. He said, and these are his exact words, kids are a money pit. I'd rather buy a boat. My father's face went white. Not gradually. All at once. Like a screen losing power. When I finally got pregnant, I read, because the truth deserved to be spoken, he said, fine, but if it's not a boy, don't expect me to be excited. And then you came. You came and you were everything. I paused. Breathe. My father's face was a color I'd never seen before. He told everyone you were an accident. I read, my voice carrying across the yard like it belonged there. Because the truth embarrassed him. That a man who called himself the head of the house had to be begged by his wife to become a father. That he fought it every step of the way. That he only agreed because I told him I'd leave if he said no one more time. Carol spoke from the back of the yard. Quiet. Final. She wrote this 2 years before the diagnosis, Robert. She wasn't confused. She wasn't medicated. She was clear. My father said nothing. His sixth Budweiser hung at his side, forgotten, dripping condensation onto his shoe. He moved. It was fast. The lunge of a man who'd spent his whole life being the one who decided when a conversation was over. He crossed the 2 steps between us and reached for the letter. His hand opened. His fingers grasped. "Give me that." Jake Whitmore stood up from the picnic bench. 25 years old. Carol's son. 6'1" in work boots. He'd been eating quietly the whole time. And now he was standing between my father and me with his hands at his sides. Not aggressive. Not theatrical. Just there. Uncle Robert. Jake's voice was the opposite of my father's. Low. Steady. Unbothered. Let her finish. My father looked at Jake like he'd been slapped by a piece of furniture. In his world, younger men didn't interrupt older men. It didn't compute. "This is none of your business, boy. This is family." "It's a family gathering," Jake said. "Seems like family business to me." My father spun toward the crowd, arms wide, searching for backup. "Is nobody going to? This is my family. My house. Is it?" That was me. 2 words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My father stopped. The word "my" hung in the air between us like a challenge. And for the first time in my life, I watched my father hear it. Uncle Bill hadn't moved from his Adirondack chair. He was staring at my father with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not loyalty. Something closer to doubt. Donna had drifted backward. Her Prosecco was abandoned on the table. She was standing near the side gate, clutching her car keys. Nobody was on my father's side of the yard anymore. I turned to the second page. The next part, I said, "This is the part that's going to matter." I smoothed the second page against my palm and read, "Jessica, there's something about the house I need you to know. Your father has called it his for as long as you can remember. My roof. My rules. You've heard it 1,000 times. So has everyone else." I could see heads nodding slightly around the yard. They'd heard it too. But the house at 414 Maple Lane was purchased with $180,000 from my parents. Your grandparents. David and Ruth Whitmore. It was their money. An early inheritance they gave me when your father and I were first married because they wanted me to have something that was mine. I felt the stillness deepen. This wasn't shock anymore. This was something clicking into place. The architecture of a lie being dismantled in real time. "The deed is in my name," I continued. "Ellen Whitmore. Your father's name has never been on it. He didn't pay for it. He didn't co-sign for it. It is not his house. It has never been his house." My father's face went white. "I made a will," I read. "A legal will prepared by attorney Richard Avery and witnessed by my sister Carol. The house goes to you, Jessica. It was filed and entered into probate after my death. By the time you read this, the title has already transferred." I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the 2 documents I'd brought. A photocopy of the recorded deed. A certified copy of the relevant page of my mother's will. I placed them on the table face up next to the quitclaim deed my father had wanted me to sign. 3 pieces of paper. His lie next to her truth. Donna spoke first. She was still by the gate, car keys in hand, and her voice had the flat tone of a woman doing a title search in her head. "Robert, you told me the house was yours." My father didn't look at her. "It is my house," he said. "I lived here 30 years. Carol's voice came like a closing statement. "Living in a house doesn't make it yours. Paying for it does. And you didn't." Uncle Bill stared at the deed on the table. He didn't touch it. He didn't speak, but his jaw was working like he was chewing through 30 years of conversations that had just changed meaning. My father stood in the middle of his own backyard barbecue, surrounded by 31 people who'd come for hot dogs and hamburgers and summer happiness, and he had nothing left to say. His hand was shaking. The one that had pointed at me. The one that had grabbed for the letter. The one that had held his beer like a scepter. It was shaking. I didn't need to yell. The deed spoke louder than anything I could have said. "There's more," I said. I didn't say it loudly. I said it the way you say the labs came back when the news isn't over yet. I turned back to my mother's letter. "Before I died," I read, "I discovered something that made me realize I couldn't leave this to chance. Your father applied for a second mortgage on our home, a home he does not own, through First Regional Bank. The loan officer called our family attorney because Robert's name wasn't on the deed. The application was denied. I looked up. My father was staring at me like I was reading his autopsy report while he was still alive. That's when I knew I read. That's when I called Carol. That's when we went to see Richard Avery and made everything official. The will. The trust. This letter. Because if your father would try to borrow against a house he doesn't own while I was alive, I had no doubt he'd try to take it from you after I was gone. I set the letter down. The yard processed it in waves. First the closer relatives. Uncle Bill pressing his fingers to the bridge of his nose. Cousin Patty whispering something to her husband. Then the outer ring. The neighbors exchanging glances. The church ladies going very quiet. And then Donna. She was already halfway through the gate, but she stopped and turned back. Her voice had lost every trace of that warm, soothing open house cadence. Robert, did you try to mortgage a house that wasn't yours? Baby, I can explain. I'm a real estate agent, she said, holding her car keys like a verdict. I know what fraud looks like. The gate clicked shut behind her. A moment later, an engine turned over in the driveway and tires rolled across gravel, and Donna Kessler was gone. My father watched the gate for a long 3 seconds. Then he sat down in his lawn chair like somebody had cut his strings. There was 1 page left. I almost didn't read it. The first 2 had done the work. The facts. The evidence. The architecture of a lie dismantled in public. But the last page wasn't about property or mortgages. It was about something harder. Something that made my hands tremble for the first time all afternoon. Not from fear. From grief. I have one more thing to say, I read. And this one is for me, not for him. The crowd didn't move. Somewhere on the next block, someone set off a bottle rocket. It whistled and popped and nobody flinched. I spent 30 years married to your father and I never once said no to him, I read, my voice cracking. I never argued. I never raised my voice. I never left even when I should have. I told myself it was for you. That I was keeping the family together. But the truth is I was afraid. I let my voice crack. Let it be heard. The thing I'm most ashamed of. The thing that keeps me up at 3 a.m. when the pain medication wears off. Is that every time he yelled at you instead of me, some part of me was relieved. And then I hated myself for it every single time. Cousin Patty was crying. She wasn't the only one. Uncle Bill stood from his chair, walked to the edge of the patio, and stopped there with his back to everyone. His hands were in his pockets. His head was down. I can't change what I did and didn't do, I read. But I can give you what I never had. The house is yours. The trust Carol helped me set up. $220,000. That's yours too. That's my apology and my love in the same envelope. I read the last line slowly because my mother had underlined it twice. You were not an accident, Jessica. You were the thing I fought hardest for. Don't be afraid to say what I never could. You are allowed to say no. I folded the letter. 3 sheets of cream stationery back into the envelope. Back into my scrub pocket against my heart. My father sat in his lawn chair with his 6th beer leaking onto the grass beside him. He was surrounded by 31 people who could no longer look him in the eye. He didn't say a word. For a long moment, the only sounds were the flag 2 houses down and a dog barking somewhere on the next street. The grill was still smoking. The food was still out. The string lights my mother had hung were starting to glow against the early evening sky. Nobody left. Nobody spoke. It was like the whole yard was holding its breath, waiting to find out what kind of family they were going to be now. My father looked around. He turned his head slowly, searching for the faces that had always been on his side. The people who'd nodded when he said, my house. Who'd laughed when he said, I wanted a son. Who'd texted me to call him more. Nobody met his gaze. The second cousin who'd murmured, poor Robert, 10 minutes earlier, was sitting with her plate in her lap, staring at the grass. Her eyes were red. My father tried. You're all going to believe a dead woman over me. It landed like a stone in a pond. Ripples, then silence. Nobody answered. Jake said from the picnic bench without heat. We're going to believe a notarized will and a property deed, Uncle Robert. Carol walked forward, stopping beside me. She didn't touch me, but I could feel her steadiness like a wall at my back. Robert, she said, Richard Avery has all the original documents. I'd suggest you contact your own attorney. A pause. You're going to need one. I gathered the papers from the table. The deed. The will. The unsigned quitclaim. and I stacked them neatly. I tucked the letter back into my scrub pocket, over my heart. I pushed in my chair. Then I said the last thing I was going to say to my father at that table. I'm not selling this house. I'm not signing anything. And I'm not asking for your permission. I looked at him once more. The man in the lawn chair in the yard he didn't own, holding the authority that no longer worked. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not pitiable. Just accurately sized for the first time. I walked out through the side gate. Carol and Jake followed. Behind me, 31 people sat with their paper plates and their sparklers and the ruins of a story they believed for 30 years. Richard Avery sent a formal letter to my father the following Monday. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. It stated in plain legal language that the property at 414 Maple Lane was owned by Jessica Ellen Harper, pursuant to the last will and testament of my mother. That the estate had been fully administered through probate. And that my father was occupying the property without legal right. He was given 60 days to vacate. Standard by the book. No theatrics. My father didn't hire a lawyer. I don't think he could afford one. The credit card debt alone was $38,000. I learned this later from Uncle Bill, who'd seen a statement on my father's kitchen counter. Add the auto loan on the Dodge Ram. Add whatever he'd spent on the Weber grill and Donna's dinners, and the life of a man pretending to be richer than he was. There was nothing left. The house he'd tried to sell, estimated at $280,000 by Donna's own market analysis, had never been his to sell. The second mortgage he tried to take out had been denied because his name wasn't on the deed. The quitclaim deed he tried to get me to sign would have been the only way to make any of it work, and I hadn't signed it. His entire plan had depended on one thing. His daughter being too afraid to say no. Donna stopped answering his calls within a week. Blocked his number by the end of the month. I have no ill will toward Donna. She was looking for a man with assets, and my father had presented himself as one. That's not love, but it's also not my problem. The trust my mother had set up held $220,000. Enough to pay off my student loans. Enough to establish an emergency fund. Enough to still have money left over for the future. My mother had planned this from a hospital bed, while my father was in the garage polishing his truck. She was in the kitchen with Carol building a firewall out of ink and notary stamps. Uncle Bill called me 2 weeks after the barbecue. I was sitting on the porch of the Maple Lane house, my house, drinking coffee and watching the hydrangeas catch the morning light. His name appeared on my phone. My first instinct was to let it ring. The last time Bill had reached out, it was to call me selfish. To send me an article about bad daughters. Picked up anyway. He was quiet for a long time. Then I owe you an apology, kid. I waited. I believed everything he told me. That you wouldn't visit. That you didn't care. That he was doing this all on his own. A pause. I just found out from Carol that you were the only one who took your mother to chemo every appointment for over a year. And Robert told me, he looked me in the eye and told me that you refused to help. I closed my eyes and felt the familiar ache of a lie that had done its damage long before the truth arrived. He told me a lot of things Bill said about the house, about your mother, about everything. And I just believed him because he's my brother and I'm sorry. Thank you, Uncle Bill. I said that means more than you know. He cleared his throat. One more thing. A few months back he asked me to co-sign a personal loan. $20,000. I said no because it didn't feel right. A tired laugh. I guess now I know why. Before he hung up, he said the thing that mattered most. Your mom would have been proud of you, Jessica. I sat on that porch for a long time after that call. I moved back into the house on Maple Lane at the end of August. After my father's 60 days were up. He had already gone by the time I arrived with my boxes. He'd left the place cleaner than I expected. The kitchen wiped down. The garbage taken out. Whether that was guilt or pride, I'll never know. Maybe some combination that my father would never have the vocabulary to explain. The recliner was gone. He'd taken it with him. The one piece of furniture in the house that was indisputably his. The living room looked bigger without it. Brighter. I donated the spot to a reading chair I found at the same estate sale circuit my mother used to love. The first thing I did was hang the wedding photo back up. I'd found it in the garage in a box labeled donate in my father's handwriting. The photo of my mother in her simple ivory dress laughing. Her hand on my father's chest like she was reaching for something she wasn't sure he had. The winter coat she'd loved. Some books she'd cherished. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, the Chanel No. 5. The bottle was nearly empty. I set it on the vanity where it had always been. Carol came over that first evening with a tray of lasagna and a bottle of wine that cost more than anything my father had ever put on the table. We sat at the kitchen counter and didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Jake helped me carry boxes upstairs. He didn't say anything profound. He just pointed at the master bedroom door and said, "You taking that room?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I am." That night, I sat at my mother's vanity for the first time. I looked at myself in the oval mirror she'd looked into every morning for 30 years. I placed the letter on the vanity, leaning against the mirror. Then I went outside and watered the hydrangeas. I lived in my mother's house. Not my father's house. Hers. And now mine. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd signed that paper at the barbecue. If I'd folded the way he expected. The way my mother always had. If I'd become her for one more generation. And then I think my mother wrote that letter so I wouldn't have to be. She spent her last good months making sure I'd have the ground to stand on and the proof to back it up. Final, because here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Standing up to the people who raised you is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's not standing up to strangers or coworkers or people who don't know your history. It's taking on the person whose voice you've heard your entire life telling you that you're wrong, that you're selfish, that you're not enough. But sometimes that's exactly what you have to do. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because your peace, your dignity, and your future are worth protecting. Always. 6 months after the barbecue, I got an update on my father from Uncle Bill. He had moved into Bill's spare bedroom. He was working extra shifts at the auto parts store. Still assistant manager. Still resentful about it. But now without the safety net of a house he'd never owned to fall back on. Bill said my father spent most evenings in the spare room watching TV on a small screen he'd brought from Maple Lane. He didn't talk much about the barbecue. He didn't talk much about anything. My father hadn't called me. Not once in 6 months. I hadn't called him either. But I wanted to be clear about something. I didn't tell him he could never reach out. I didn't slam a door. I said what I needed to say and then I waited. If he calls, I told Carol one Sunday over coffee, I'll answer. But he has to start with the truth. The real truth. Not the version he's been telling himself for 30 years. The real truth. Carol nodded. And if he doesn't call, then that's his choice. I meant it. I was at peace with both outcomes. The one where my father found the courage to be honest for the first time in his life. And the one where he didn't. Either way, I was standing in my own house. Paying my own bills. Sleeping in a room where the vanity smelled like Chanel No. 5. And nobody was going to hand me a pen and tell me to sign away what my mother had given me. People ask me if it was worth it. The confrontation. The letter. The barbecue. They want to know if I feel vindicated. If revenge tastes as good as they say. Here's what I'll tell you. I didn't do it for revenge. I didn't stand up at that table because I wanted to humiliate my father. I stood up because my mother asked me to. Not in those words. But in every word she wrote in that letter. She asked me to be the woman she couldn't be. And the smallest thing I could do to honor that was to open my mouth when she would have closed hers. My mother lived 30 years in fear. She cooked his meals and folded his shirts and sat in the passenger seat of her own life. And the one thing she couldn't forgive herself for was that she let him aim his anger at me because it meant he wasn't aiming it at her. She wrote that in the letter. She didn't dress it up or make excuses. She just said it plainly the way she should have been able to say everything. I don't hate my father. I want to be clear about that. Hate takes energy I'd rather spend on 12-hour shifts in hydrangea bushes and Sunday dinners with Carol and Jake. What I feel for my father is something quieter and more precise. A recognition that he is a man who was given a family and treated it like a possession. And when the receipts came out, he had nothing in his name. I learned something that 4th of July. Boundaries aren't selfish. Silence isn't always peace. And the people who tell you to keep the family together are usually the ones who aren't being torn apart by it. My mother taught me all of this. She just had to die first to say it out loud. And I think that's the part that hurts the most. This morning before my shift, I went out to water the hydrangeas. It was early, 6 a.m. The light was still thin and blue. The street was quiet. I stood in the yard in my bare feet the way my mother used to, stepping over the second and third porch boards out of habit, even though I'd fixed them both in September. She planted those bushes the first spring after they moved in. My father wanted to pull them out, said they took up too much of the yard, that he wanted space for a grill and a horseshoe pit. My mother said no. One of the only times she did. She stood in the garden with dirt on her knees and a trowel in her hand and said, "These stay." And they stayed for 30 years. Through every argument and every silence and every time my father said, "My house," in front of company, those hydrangeas kept blooming. Blue and purple and stubborn and alive. I think about that a lot. How my mother lost almost every battle in that marriage except the flowers. How she picked the one thing she was willing to fight for, and held on to it with both hands in the dirt. She couldn't keep herself safe. But she kept the hydrangeas. And she kept the deed. And she kept the letter. I turned off the hose and stood in the yard. My yard. The house glowed white behind me in the early light. If you asked me whether what I did was revenge, I'd say no. It wasn't revenge. It was a promise my mother made me keep. Think she'd like that. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. I know it was a long one. And I know some parts were hard to hear. They were hard to tell. If anything in this story felt familiar. If you've sat at a table where someone tried to make you small. If you've held a pen over a paper you knew you shouldn't sign. If you've loved someone who couldn't protect you and forgave them anyway. I'd like to hear about it. The comments are open and I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Not for the algorithm. For the next person who needs to hear that it's okay to say no to someone who raised you. And if you haven't had enough yet, there's another story linked in the description. About a woman whose family tried to erase her from the Thanksgiving table. She didn't have a letter from her mother. She had something else. I think you'll want to hear how that one ends. I'm Jessica. I'm 28. I'm an ICU nurse. And I live in my mother's house on Maple Lane where the hydrangeas bloom every summer whether anyone gives them permission or not.